Hey everybody, Drew Dinkmeyer here doing a Week 3 cash game lineup review for my lineups on Fanduel and DraftKings. A little bit of a disappointing week for me. Felt pretty good about the decisions I made actually, but the results ended up being below average. For me, I ended up losing, I want to say like 25-30% this week. Big part of that was I had nothing in contention in GPPs because I didn't have any of Calvin Ridley, even though I was really, really high on Atlanta. And then in cash games, it was a mixed bag, which we'll get into here. So let's start with FanDuel. As always, the basis for all of my cash game decision making is our projections over at DailyRoto.com that myself and Mike Leone work on each and every week. I've sorted by value here at the quarterback position, and you can see our top values at the position: Patrick Mahomes, Matt Ryan, Blake Bortles, Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz, Ryan Tannehill, so on and so forth. Over at running back, we had Todd Gurley, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, all looking at standout values: Christian McCaffrey, Giovanni Bernard, Tevin Coleman, Zeke, Melvin Gordon, Saquon Barkley, Corey Clement, David Johnson, a little bit less so. At wide receiver, some of the top values this week at the position were Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, Nelson Aguilar, DeAndre Hopkins, Adam Thielen, Odell, Keenan Allen, T.Y. Hilton. But really what ended up happening is you needed some value on the slate. So, Sammy Watkins, Robert Woods, those guys were good values for us. And if you go a little bit lower, you get Tyler Boyd, and then a little bit lower than that, or not lower than Boyd, but a little bit lower in our value, a little bit higher priced Geronimo Allison. And those guys were in consideration for me as well as far as salary reliefs. At the tight end spot, we had a bit of a distinct play at tight end in terms of the value rankings. Travis Kelce was really the guy over at tight end. And then at defense, it was really the Vikings defense, which, whew, boy, that went about as poorly as I could possibly. Well, I couldn't even imagine what happened to the Vikings happening, but they were our top value defense. So if you look at kind of going through the projections, the positions that stand out, the Vikings look like a much stronger value relative to the field. Kelce looks like a much stronger value relative to the field. The running back position had a little bit of separation with these top guys, with Gurley, Kamara, Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray being so cheap makes roster construction a little bit easier with him. So you can start to see, just kind of going through the projections, where there were strong gaps in terms of the players. And that translated over into my lineups. We'll take a look at the first lineup. This is the lineup that I used most heavily. Blake Bortles at quarterback, and this ultimately was the decision that cost me in cash games this week. I played 3 cash game lineups on FanDuel. 2 of them were Blake Bortles lineups. Neither of them cashed. If I'd used Ryan Tannehill, who was $100 cheaper and projecting a little bit below Bortles, but similar price point, similar value, would have cashed easily. So the Blake Bortles decision, haunted me. Latavius Murray, everybody was pretty much playing. 76% ownership is actually kind of surprisingly low for me in this double up. Giovanni Bernard, we seem to be higher on the market than Giovanni Bernard, and obviously his role in Cincinnati without Joe Mixon was that of a workhorse. They don't have a lot of running back depth. They only had 2 running backs active on the roster. And, Mark Walton wasn't very good in the preseason, so knew there'd be a ton of opportunities for Giovanni Bernard. It was just a matter of whether he found the end zone. Thankfully, scored on the first drive, and kind of all your fears about the touchdown scoring environment were alleviated immediately. Nelson Aguilar, really disappointing performance from him. Carson Wentz and the Eagles did not get off on the right foot, underperformed their implied total for the 3rd straight week, and Carson Wentz just looked a little bit rusty. Aguilar did not get the same opportunities. I was not concerned about any of the stuff about Aguilar's success on the outside versus in the slot. I thought they'd run a lot of 2 tight end sets, which they did, and Aguilar already plays 40% of his snaps outside coming into the week. So just a disappointing performance. The opportunities weren't there as much. They didn't get the ball down the field very often. Tyler Boyd, one of those salary relief wide receivers that I really liked this week. Julio Jones, our top rated wide receiver, I was able to get up to him. Travis Kelce, who was surprisingly low owned to me. This was an advantage spot in cash games to be able to play Travis Kelce here. Didn't find the end zone, but man, had so many looks and racked up yards. And then Todd Gurley or Alvin Kamara. I think the decision here was ultimately one of these 2 players, and you'll see I made that decision in the other lineup, in one of the other lineups I used in the Vikings D. If you look at my Bortles lineups, basically it's a 2v2, I believe. The other Bortles lineup, or excuse me, that's a Deshaun Watson lineup. The other Bortles lineup was Geronimo Allison and Sammy Watkins simply versus Nelson Aguilar and Tyler Boyd. And that was just a little bit of a diversification. I liked all these plays, wanted to get a little bit more exposure to the Kansas City offense. got me 3 points because Allison got crushed by Boyd, but Watkins crushed Aguilar. But still, not enough to cash. So these two Blake Bortles teams were just below. And, I mean, you get 9 from a quarterback, it's going to be a tough week. And that was certainly the case here. No touchdowns for Blake Bortles as Jacksonville only scored 6 points, and that really sunk my week. The Deshaun Watson teams rolled. They were great. The difference here, you can see Latavius Murray, Gio Bernard, Julio Jones, Travis Kelce, Vikings defense, all the same. The difference here is Deshaun Watson over Blake Bortles cost about $1,000 more, needed to lose $1,000 somewhere. And the way that I was losing that was $600 from Gurley down to Kamara, got me $400 of the way there. And then that second wide receiver spot, Nelson Aguilar down to Sammy Watkins. And, I couldn't mess around with Geronimo Allison here and Tyler Boyd because I didn't have the room. So just a 3v3, Deshaun Watson, Sammy Watkins, and Alvin Kamara over Blake Bortles, Nelson Aguilar, and Todd Gurley. And 40-point difference on that 3v3. So, it's one of those things you react to news, and Blake Bortles had these wide splits without Fournette. They seem to open up the offense, play pass heavier. Tennessee was a team that had struggled against the Dolphins in their opener and then played decent defense, pass defense against Houston the next week. But last year was kind of a funnel defense that really struggled against the pass. So Jacksonville had a 24.5 implied total at home, something like that. I felt pretty darn good about that Bortles play. Even one touchdown pass from Bortles, and I think I get a lot of these teams across the line. Maybe might have needed 2. I mean, 9 is just tough to overcome. But, feel pretty good about the teams I put out there. In total, I feel like they were balanced pretty well. I had some high-end players at their positions like Julio Jones and Travis Kelce, and then one of Kamara Gurley had the top defense. That just was a huge letdown. Not that many defenses were great this week. Latavius Murray, 92% in this contest. That's much more of an ownership that I would have expected in a double up. But, a disappointing week for me. One of the 3 cash game lineups was a winner. The other 2 were not. You can't win cash games winning 33% of the time. So tough week for me on Fanduel and cash games. Let's go over to DraftKings, where I made 5 teams, and the team combinations on DraftKings, I felt like there were a bunch of plays that I wanted to get into, and then there were some plays that I was a little bit nervous of, so I was trying to rotate some exposure off of. But we'll look at our DraftKings projections to kind of lead the way here, and once again, we'll start at the quarterback position and we'll sort by by value. And once again, Pat Mahomes was our top value, followed by Matt Ryan and Deshaun Watson, and then Bortles. I thankfully avoided Bortles here, but I felt this gap in projected value, 2 to 3 points for Mahomes and Ryan, was the one that I knew I was playing one of those 2 at quarterback. And ultimately, I decided I wanted to play both because I was just going to have so much Falcons exposure, and we'll talk about why when we get to the wide receiver position, because Julio Jones was just so underpriced on DraftKings at $7,900 that I was going to have him in all my lineups. So the fact that I had Matt Ryan and Julio Jones together made me a little bit concerned that, hey, if I'm wrong on this, if Atlanta's offense sputters, I'm probably dead on sight. So I decided to mix in some Mahomes. But we'll look at wide receivers. We'll bring it back to running backs. Michael Thomas also is a really strong value. Nelson Aguilar, Robert Woods, Tyreek Hill, T.Y. Hilton. But really after, Julio and Michael Thomas, there's kind of a big gap here. Aguilar was pretty good. Woods is pretty good. And then it kind of trails off into a bunch of guys who are, kind of neutral level values. You see some guys who performed here in Cooper Kupp and Sammy Watkins and Adam Thielen. You see some disappointments like T.Y. Hilton, Keenan Allen. But it was pretty close here on the level. If you needed salary relief, you could see Dante Moncrief ended up sneaking ahead of Tyler Boyd in our projections on that Leonard Fournette news. We just bumped the target share up on the wide receivers a little bit. We bumped the pass pass percentage up for Jacksonville a little bit. And so Dante Moncrief kind of sneaked up here. I was not super comfortable with Moncrief, and the fact that I knew I was playing Bortles on FanDuel made it so that I was more comfortable loading up on Tyler Boyd. I think Tyler Boyd's a really good player. The difference between the two was, not substantial. We had similar market shares of targets. We have actually Moncrief as a little bit more historically efficient, but that was kind of boosted a little bit by matchup, where Boyd was brought down a little bit by matchup. And we had Moncrief as a better touchdown scorer than Boyd. I kind of think that Boyd's probably going to be a better red zone threat over time than he's shown early in his career. And so I was comfortable giving up a half point in projection to play a lot more Boyd. We'll go through the other positions, and then we'll look at the actual lineups. At tight end, Travis Kelce and Eric Ebron and George Kittle and Austin Hooper. Big advantage over the rest of the tight ends. So I knew it was going to be hard to fit in Kelsey. Would have loved to get to him, but Ebron was this guy that kind of fit the slate really well with some salary relief. Luckily got spammed on kind of the final drive and kind of paid off, but had a bunch of end zone targets that they just missed and didn't connect on. Still feel really good about that play, even though the result wasn't great because all the targets were there, all the end zone targets were there. Defense, we had nobody standing out. Eagles, Vikings, Cowboys, Chiefs, Texans, Jags. I mean, these are all priced perfectly. And that's where I got stuck this week because I didn't want to go all in on any single defense. So I spread out my defense exposures a little bit, had 5 different cash game lineups, and ultimately none of the defenses paid off. So I don't think it really mattered much, but looking back, that was a decision point for me on my cash game lineups. Bringing it back to running back because I skipped those guys to talk about Julio. Gurley, Gio, McCaffrey, Kamara, Clement, Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, Tevin Coleman, so on and so forth at this running back position, Kareem Hunt down here. Ultimately, I knew Gurley and Kamara were just going to be tough to get to if you were playing Julio and Michael Thomas or one of the two. And so that was a decision point for lineups. And I think ultimately because Julio underperformed and Michael Thomas, did fine, but Kamara had such a big game, I think that swung a lot of cash games on DraftKings. We were very high on Giovanni Bernard once again, and he was in almost all of my cash game lineups on DraftKings. So I felt really good about that spot. I had 100% of Corey Clement. Felt he was simply too cheap. Should shout out Jeff Mosher, who is a Philadelphia Eagles beat writer who has his own Patreon account. I signed up on Saturday and asked a question over there about Corey Clement's health and about his usage and Josh Adams, and he responded within a few hours and said basically Josh Adams isn't really up to speed in pass protection yet. So he thought we'd see more of Clement and Smallwood, and that's exactly what we got. Smallwood's down here as a value, for min price, reasonable tournament play. But Clement got all the work we could ask for. He didn't get the one rushing touchdown that went to Smallwood, and he wasn't super efficient. But for 4,300, I'll take 15 to 18 touches, which is what we were projecting and what we got. So let's look at the lineups. The one up top, we'll work top to bottom. This was my highest performing lineup at 179.16. Matt Ryan, Corey Clement, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, Kareem Hunt up here, Robert Woods, Eric Ebron, Giovanni Bernard, and the Texans defense. This was one of those lineups I wanted to manage the exposure I had to Latavius Murray in cash games on DraftKings. I was a little bit concerned about the receiving floor, even though he projected well. So I did mix in a little bit of Kareem Hunt just because I have so much more confidence in the Chiefs offense always generating opportunities. Now, Kareem Hunt got bailed out by 2 touchdowns. If he does not score these 2 touchdowns, this is an awful play. And my concern with Kareem Hunt, the thing that held him back in the projections, was we have him for a very low market share of targets, just 7%, and he is just not being utilized in the passing game at all. That's what kept him. We had him, for the same market share of targets as Latavius Murray, basically. And we had Latavius Murray with a little bit higher touchdown equity because historically the Bills have allowed more touchdowns on the ground. But I did spread that exposure a little bit between Hunt and Latavius Murray. But, you can see I rotated D's here, had Texans, but Bernard, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Corey Clement, and then Matt Ryan were all kind of staples of my lineups. These other guys were kind of rotated around. This was a Mahomes lineup. This was Mahomes, Corey Clement, Kamara, Nelson Aguilar, Tyler Boyd, Julio Jones, Eric Ebron. So in this lineup, I took the savings from, I think you had to make a choice between Kamara and Michael Thomas. Very tough to play them together. In this lineup, I took the savings from not using Michael Thomas, put them up into Kamara, and then that immediately made it so that I couldn't go mid-tier. Remember on that 179 lineup I had, Robert Woods as this third wide receiver. Couldn't do that if you were going up for Kamara. So I went down to Tyler Boyd, not expecting 28 DraftKings points from Tyler Boyd, but that worked out very well. You can see Ebron is in every lineup. Clement is in every lineup. Gio is in, I think, 4 of the 5 lineups. Kamara just in this one. Julio in all 5 lineups. Mahomes in 2 of the 5 lineups. This was also a winner in cash games, just kind of getting above that cash line. The next one was 151.66. So this is a Matt Ryan team with Clement, Latavius Murray, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, Sammy Watkins, Eric Ebron, Giovanni Bernard, and Eagles defense. So what are the differences between this 151 and the 179? Because those are both Matt Ryan teams, right? You see the first difference is Latavius Murray versus Kareem Hunt, and you can see that right there. The next difference is going to be Robert Woods versus, excuse me, that's not the team, Robert Woods versus Sammy Watkins, Robert both did well. Robert Woods just smashed Sammy Watkins though. And so that was a little bit of give up there. And then the third was the defense. Had a little bit more room because Latavius Murray was a little bit cheaper than Hunt. Watkins and Woods were the same price, got up to the Eagles defense on here, but didn't pay me anything. This was also barely a winner on in DK and cash. So, 3 out of the 5 were winners. The 2 losers, if you look through, Patrick Mahomes lineup here. And again, you go down to Tyler Boyd, you get Julio Jones, you get Michael Thomas, but the Latavius Murray versus Gio Bernard. This was the one lineup I played that didn't have Gio Bernard, and that was the difference between the 143.76 and the 155.36. Basically, it's just Latavius versus Gio. Some other slight differences there, but I had Gio on 80%. I think I had Latavius on 60%, so 3 of the 5. Again, Ebron, Julio, Clement on every team. And then the final team, the weakest team, was this one where I made this last-minute decision that I really, told you about that Dante Moncrief. Didn't feel good in my stomach. The numbers kind of had it as like, yeah, Moncrief is a fine value. I had $100 to work with. He was $100 more expensive than Tyler Boyd. And I said, you know what? I have 40% Tyler Boyd or 60% Tyler Boyd. Maybe I'll go 40 and 20 with Moncrief. And boy, that was a 26-point decision and ultimately cost me in this cash game lineup. So, sometimes the hedging works and sometimes it doesn't. I think on Fanduel this week, I would have played all the Bortles in cash games if I wasn't hedging lineups, and I wouldn't have had that, cash game lineup with Deshaun Watson that was a winner. In this one, if I wouldn't have hedged out of Boyd down to Moncrief, this would have been a winner, and I would have had 4 or 5 winning over on DraftKings and cash games this week. So. But this one, I avoided that mid-tier second receiver to pay up for the Vikings D. I just wanted the Vikings D on one of these 5 teams, and obviously that was a disaster to pay for. But most of the plays were fine. I mean, Matt Ryan, Patrick Mahomes were great. Hit the quarterback position exactly the way I wanted. Felt really good about that on DraftKings. Corey Clement was fine. Once again, you're getting 15 rushes and 3 catches on a team that has a mid-20s implied total for 4,300. I will take that every single day. 10.5 is okay. We had them projected at like 13. So underperformed, but totally fine with that play. Latavius game got away from. I was a little bit concerned about it, was trying to manage my exposure. Still fine with that play. At the end of the day, I think there's some merit to discuss whether a guy like this, Latavius Murray, who just has such a low floor because of his lack of involvement historically in the passing game. Now, without Dalvin Cook, you would think there would still be some, whether that guy merits cash game consideration at all. I think on this slate, it made sense, especially with the strength of the values in Michael Thomas and Julio Jones. But ultimately, DraftKings, man, with the running backs having this huge usage in the passing game this season, there's just such an incredible floor in some of those higher-end running backs. And so going forward, I think one of the things I'll be considering a little bit stronger is maybe the fact that these higher-end running backs just simply have such an incredible floor compared to the higher-end wide receivers. Sometimes maybe that's worth prioritizing over the overall value. At the end of the day, I don't feel like that really cost me on this slate, but it was something that I kind of thought through and want to continue to think through as the season goes on. Julio I had in all the lineups, and this was just disappointing, but he was 70% owned, so I don't think he really decided the slate in any way, shape, or form. Calvin Ridley just getting all the love in the red zone, and Matt Ryan throwing 5 touchdowns and not 1 to Julio. Feels crazy, but gosh, we've seen this quite a bit during the course of the last year and a half with Julio just not scoring touchdowns. Michael Thomas got his 10 catches again, which we projected him for. It's getting ridiculous with Michael Thomas, but every week it seems like we're projecting 10 catches. Ebron kind of squeaked out an okay game, but again, he had so many opportunities in the red zone, very comfortable with that. Gio, very comfortable with. And the fact that I had no confidence in any one defense and I kind of spread them around, even though they all stunk, I kind of felt rewarded that, yeah, that was the right decision. There was no huge edge. And I think the Cowboys were like 50% owned in cash games. And I could have created a nice edge on myself if the Cowboys defense stunk like it did on the road in Seattle and the others, got me 6, 7, 8 points. Unfortunately, nobody did. And all the other defenses I took were home defenses that were, mid to big favorites. So I felt like that was the right play when I was comfortable with all the other pieces and could afford a little bit upward mobility on the pricing on defense. But end of the day, 3 of 5 cash game winners on DK. I mean, that's basically breaking even in cash. You got to win at a little bit of a higher clip than that, maybe a small profit. So losing week for me on the whole with just 1 of 3 on Fanduel and 3 of 5 on DraftKings, but really felt like my decisions were fine. So I'm not going to look back at this week and feel too upset with it. Basically stuck to the projections in areas, and for the most part worked. In a couple areas it failed disastrously, and those revolved mostly around the Jaguars passing game or the Minnesota team as a whole. But that'll do it for this week's week 3 cash game lineup review. For all of you out there, if you are a subscriber to DailyRoto, I hope this helps your process. If you're not a subscriber to DailyRoto, make sure to go over to DailyRoto.com, go premium, and join us for the rest of the NFL season. We got a lot of cool things going on. Thanks, everybody. Best of luck in your games in week 4.